everyone, and welcome to Talk Together. Thank you for joining us for an evening of talking about Dungeons and or Dragons. I am David Shears, and I will be once again your host tonight. I'll be chatting to the lovely Tom, whom you can see here. Tell us a little bit about yourself, Tom.
Hi, my name is Tom Jancis. I am a writer and performer, mostly working in immersive theatre, and I'm very happy to be here.
And we are exceptionally happy to have you. We'll be going through some enticing questions and some adventurous anecdotes. The more enticing and adventurous, the better. What questions, you ask? Well, once again, the dice decide. Before we kick off, this stream will run for approximately an hour. We are delighted to be sponsored by Hero Forge, Ultra Pro, and Elderwood Academy, and supported by D&D Beyond, Warriors of Waterdeep, and Level Up Dice. We are Roll Together RPG on all social media, and a massive thank you once again to our D20 Club on Patreon. Please do check it out. Our shows are available as podcasts. Just search Roll Together RPG on your favorite podcasting app. So, without further ado, Tom, shall we roll that dice and see what question we have for you first today? So, as it makes its way across the screen, what will it be? What will it mean? It is a 4. And a 4 means that I ask you our classic twist on the dinner party question, which is, who would you love to have at your gaming table?
Ooh, wow, that's
It is a twister to begin with, yeah.
Yeah, no, sort of. Again, sort of like having watched the show and been having a little think where, again, I started sort of going off on like an insane route where I was like, I'm going to be like a time traveler, or like along that line, like someone like M.R. James, who would, like a great, like as a DM, who's like, I'm going to tell you a spooky tale, but there's going to be a golem, and you're like, or even still, like, I know people would say people like Tolkien would be fun, but like, what was it? The Inklings, the club he had like with C.S. Lewis, which just was a bunch of Oxford Dons who just, it was wonderful. They just didn't seem to like each other and had really strong opinions on like how to tell stories, which would be kind of, I mean, it could also be the worst experience ever where you've got a bunch of Oxford Dons just sitting around a table go, actually, no, I don't think acrobatics would work on that role. And you're like, shut up, Lewis.
It's a table of rules lawyers, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Sort of, I like that as a kind of very bizarre picture of a sitcom with just a guy turning up to major events and just going, hey, Wellington, Napoleon, calm down. Maybe if we did Curse of Strahd, we could work through some stuff. And but I think, so who have I got? I've got M.R. James, Tolkien, C.S. Lewis. I've just got this massive party who are just like, can we... is this, can we come this week? And I'm like, sure. I mean, we've got like 4 clerics, but just
might have to make it a one shot. Yeah,
just one shot for all these historical events, and then just going, I don't like this ending. I'm like, well, write your own version, and then turning up and going, or like again, like turning up to sort of like Alexander the Great and going, okay, first of all, you need to invent. You've got a dice. Okay, you need to invent other shapes because I think they found like D20s in like ancient Egypt, so they were like, there's the if you're taking like that shape, you're like, well, maybe if we're going to go insane conspiracy theory, maybe I did time travel back then and just go, here, make one out of stone. It's weighted.
It's a tetrahedral time twist. I like it. But I mean, we don't know for a fact that at some point in the future you won't invent a time machine, and that the reason that we have all of this literature and development is not, in fact, because you did go back and have these games. I mean, there's no proof that isn't the cause of it all, right? So absolutely. And then the difficulty, I turn up to Gary Gygax and then just go confusing, very confusing. Written these rules for you. There might need to be a few more additions.
Yeah, I was going to say it's going to take some additions.
Just want to start you off. Well, I think it's only fair in the circumstances to give you all the credit for all literature throughout history. And
I mean, until otherwise proven, as horrific as that is.
Yeah, we leave it to the world to disprove time travel, at which point we will revise that opinion. But for now, it will remain thus. And on that note of bigging up the time contributions of the world.
Once again, a white man has taken credit for all this unknown stuff. Yeah.
Yes,
Horrific.
I think we can all agree that there hasn't been enough of that throughout history, he said with a tone of heavy sarcasm. Shall we once again roll that dice and allow chat to take advantage of the emoji/emoticon, whichever you prefer? Well, that is a 5. We've had a 4, now we have a 5. And a 5 means I ask you, how do you feel about cosplay?
Ooh, interesting. Well, that was the thing. Like, again, having watched the show and watching Ed, sort of like, I can kind of see what Ed was saying about that idea of just going, well, that's what I do. But I think the wonderful thing about this world we're making is there's such crossover. So you're like, yes, you work in cosplay, but also it's very likely you might be working in costumes for theatre, and I'm all for it. I think it's an exciting way of expanding it. I think, especially sort of the idea of fan responses to stuff is very exciting, and that same sort of. I do think. Well, like all this, there's a certain amount of gatekeeping, but, they're just sort of like going, I'm sorry, she wouldn't wear that kind of hat. And you're like, well, sort of like, where someone was like, oh, look, you're playing Tifa from Final Fantasy VII. Wear the things on your gloves. Whereas, what's the... But I think, sort of like, if you're looking on like D&D on Instagram, just the amazing, like the makeup and the effort. And then people were like, yeah, I've been working on this for months.
Yeah.
And it's also actually sort of quite good when you're sort of like, when you are designing a character and you're sort of like, okay, what have other people? Like same with, I like the fact that when people are like, yeah, I'm drawing my PC. That's, look at the size of the hats. It's all about the hats.
Oh yeah. Or if, Final Fantasy VII, giant swords. Yeah. Giant swords. I genuinely admire people who have the capacity to make things and like craft armor out of styrofoam or whatever. I'm absolutely in awe of it. Or like you say, people who are capable of drawing their characters and these fantastic, because I have zero talent.
Absolutely, yeah, same.
I mean, if someone wanted to craft a costume for me, sure, I'll happily wear it. But I'm the kind of person who would, go out for a Halloween party with a sheet over my head and call myself a ghost. I think zombie American footballer was exactly what I was 3 years in a row, simply because I could get hold of some fake blood and I had the stuff. That was just grotesque lack of imagination.
The number of costumes where you're like, yeah, I'm the undead version of this.
Yeah. I'm undead guy in a shirt.
Or when people are like, I'm a serial killer, they always look like you're just like, okay, power move to you.
But you never know when being good at cosplay might lead to opportunities. Because I read recently that in The Mandalorian, they didn't have enough stormtrooper costumes to go around. So they got hold of, there's a chapter, they're called something like the First Legion or something like that. Someone will be able to supply it, but they have these incredibly realistic stormtrooper costumes. They go to conventions and so on, and they actually got hired as extras in The Mandalorian because they already had all the stuff. And I'm like, cool.
You do a call out. You're like, we need stormtroopers. Like, our moment's here. Yeah,
so it can lead to other things. I don't know. I know some actors who are into LARPing and stuff. I don't really understand how it works, but at the same time, like if that's your thing, I'm all for it, and I admire the creativity that goes into it. Right?
I mean, I said, like I work in immersive stuff, so it's not that far. And
that's true.
I've done like durational pieces. Where I've been sort of had to be in character. I've given someone my phone number and I'm like, if you need me at 3 a.m, this is where you can get me, that same. So I think, again, like so much of this stuff where it just comes down to you're going to need good people. You're going to need, it could be absolutely horrific going off to the woods, or it could be the most insane fun as, like I've got in conversations with people who, oh yeah, I just met this guy like 2 days before, and then I'm holding him in my arms, just going, you get up, come on, you've got, Odin requires you to stand, just, again, I think I said, it really depends on the people you've got, and sort of the willingness to go with it. And I think that applies to D&D as well,
Absolutely.
Yeah, so much of it just sort of like go, when people are like, oh, how do you start? You're like, I guess find good people, who are going to, I'm going to stop that because we might get on to like my things for newbies. I'll say you sort of, I think absolutely the same thing where you're looking at, it's very nice to see someone do something well, but also be able to go, I could not do that. Tip of the hat, acknowledge that's incredibly. Or even like the thing when people are like, oh, this was my first cosplay. And I'm like, well, that looks amazing. You're wearing a wig thing, I'm just like, yeah. As I said, me and you just like going, blood, there you go. That's a look.
I did this 2-second ink doodle of my character and you look at it and you're like, okay, you could do that in like 7 years, maybe.
I just knocked it off.
Just as an ancillary question to this, because I am personally curious, and I'm gonna invoke my my hegemonic status as host of the show. When you've been doing immersive theatre, has there ever been a moment when it was hardest to stay in character, when someone just gave you something that just almost took you out of it?
There's the fun of it, like sort of the stuff I'm doing where I can kind of acknowledge that I'm so I was doing a show with a company called Parabolic, who are still making, actually sort of, if people are watching, they're doing an online show. Actually, they're doing a show in Bethnal Green at the moment as well, which is insane. You're running around trying to save the world. But so I'm playing like the captain of a spaceship, and I got told, cool, you got a group of 10-year-olds who are going to be your crew. And just the fact of just going, well, I'm just acknowledging, I'm a 6'2" guy in my 30s, and there's just a crew of 10-year-olds just and there was actually sort of a great, because I'm sort of the captain, and at one point when the crew were like, oi, mate, and I was like, excuse me, you do not get to click. I get to click. I am the captain. And there's a point where we have like a diplomacy thing, and I need to go on to the other ship. And I was like, okay, you're in charge. And the guy's like, can I click now? And I was like, by all means. And then I just went, oh no, you can't. He can click. I think that's just, again, where you're having those moments of sort of delight, that kind of thing of just going, I'm going to let this go, but going, I think the character is also quite amused by this. And then there's also sort of like just sort of things where people have just got drunk and fallen down, and you're just like, I need you to get up.
Come on, man. Odin requires you to be sober.
oh God, you're on weapons. And then someone just again going, I could just blow up the engines. I was like, by all means you could. It would kill everyone and would cut your time on the ship down considerably, but by all means. I think, and again, I think this goes to D&D as well, being able to have the ability to just go, weird, okay, let's sort of like let it roll over us.
Anyway.
But also be just able to go, weird choice. But
you take what you're given and you build on top of it, right? That is the goal of D&D. But I completely agree with you. When you've got people who are fully inhabiting their character and fully invested, it makes it that much easier to do the same. And that is my preference for a game. I'm quite happy to play a game where people just want to roll the dice and hit things. That's enjoyable. But I love that kind of creative outlet and that the acting side of it and inhabiting the character. But I can definitely see you being in a space show. If you'll forgive me for saying so, because I mean this as an absolute compliment. One of my personal heroes, Captain William T. Riker.
Oh yes,
very, very strong Riker energy, which I am all about. And I hope
the weird thing over the chat.
Oh yeah. I mean that's mandatory, right?
Actually, sort of like watching the chat for an episode, someone was like, he's like Tim Curry, and I was like,
oh yes,
I was just like, actually in this Parabolic show where I was just there going, I can see you through the cameras, my friends, and just like, and everyone's like, why are you doing that insane voice? And I was like, the character's like, just because again I was supposed to be like, we're all working together, and now, and like I'd promised them like coffee and biscuits when they come back, and I was like, Talavar, if you do not return, I will drink all all the tea. You can't have any of it. And I'm like, why are you doing? And I was like, they're loving it. And they're like, yeah, this guy who's gone space mad.
He has the space tea sickness.
He's drank too much. You need to filter it. But Riker, I will definitely take. Thank you. Good compliment.
No, honestly meant. Well, shall we move at warp speed to the next question?
Make it so, as the other guy would say.
You got to love some Patrick Stewart. Oh, interesting. That's a 3. So we've had a 4, a 5, and a 3.
Wow, we're down the bottom. Yeah,
we're staying very much around that sort of area. And this is I'm curious to know your answer to this. It's a possibly controversial question. We'll see. Everyone has their favorites, but it means I'll ask you this, Tom. What is your favorite character class?
Ooh, nice. If I'm thinking about sort of like what I've been playing mostly, it's mostly been rogues, which I find, and again, it's sort of, I think it's sort of very much sort of like when you first get introduced and, you know, to the whole thing and like, what do you want to do? And I was like, I quite like the idea of being sneaky and then sort of like, and that same sort of idea of like knowing that there are traps out there, but also that sort of like, I think this is the fascinating thing that as soon as you're like, okay, and I think this would be interesting, like for introducing someone to the game for the first time, you're like, okay, this is the start. Be aware it's going to branch off into like a dozen different ways. So I've sort of, again, like most recently playing Escape from Carceri, who I was playing an Inquisitor rogue, which I just still love as a term. It's like, hey, he's an Inquisitive rogue, which is, you know, insane, where it was a character who's obviously prepared for like a drawing room murder mystery and then has been sent to hell to go get someone. And so I'm like, I can tell that person's lying. Cool, he's a fiend, you know. But also sort of, I like sneak attack. I like the fact, and I think it's a nice thing to be able to balance it out and just sort of go, I'm happy to be towards the back and sort of lean round, just hit someone with an arrow and disappear again. I mean, I think, as I said, it's like my introduction to it, where I kind of like, for spells, where I was like, oh, what do you mean I can only do so much? You know, I want to be the guy who's just like fireball, you know. But then that's sort of the fun of like looking at cantrips and just like, it's Eldritch Blast, isn't it? I'm just going to have to stick with Eldritch Blast. But you know, sort of like sort of like other stuff I've played, you know, sort of, I think it's been more sort of combat, sort of like fighter or stuff. I think, maybe some form of spellcaster next would be quite fun. But as I said, just that idea of just going, I think it's like the warlock thing of just going, cool, I've done a bit and now I'm really sleepy. I just need to
use my 2 spells.
And I think also that's like, if you're a fighter or a rogue and you get, okay, I missed, that's, you know, you'll come around again. But like, if you're a spellcaster and you're like, okay, that was the 4th level. I just need to go to the back and just have a sit down.
If you do play a warlock in the future, beg, borrow, or steal from your DM. There's an item, Braces of the Something, which enable you to double cast any cantrip. So if you've got Agonizing Blast, Eldritch Blast, you're basically pumping out 4 of those every round, and it's absolutely brutal. So there's a little warlocky tip for you.
Appreciate it.
But rogues, man, they were always essential. Like especially in the old the Baldur's Gate games, and presumably therefore earlier versions of D&D. Like traps were a big thing. Traps I've come across a lot less playing 5e. Well, I'm going to ask you, like, what is the roguiest moment of roguing that you've ever rogued?
Oh, again, sort of like I said, like sort of one of the big campaigns we did was Curse of Strahd. I brought Strahd down with sneak attack, you know, again, sort of like with a magical weapon, and then sort of like our paladin was at the front, and then it was just that thing of like going, yeah, Ava does like the flying through the air, going, this isn't going to work, and watches the arrow just go straight into Strahd's eye, and like, oh, cool, just and. Like you said, that sort of idea of just going, oh, traps. And I think that's an interesting sort of like thing about sort of like home rules that like our DM would talk about the idea of like going, you would hear the click. We would let you have a moment, because otherwise you're just like, you stepped on something and but then that's quite fun because you're like, oh, I step on something, click. What do you do? I'm like, okay, I jump to the side. Cool, you jump straight into the wall. That's
disappearing and moving. Yeah, brilliant.
Yeah,
you have the agency there, right?
Absolutely. And I think just to have that moment of just going panic, now do something. And you're like, I duck. And you're like, cool, the spear's just gone straight up into your chin. You know, if you'd stayed where you were, you might have been okay. But now you've just gone,
It's giving you that chance. I like that. I think that's really cool. I've noticed as well when a lot of people, especially people who are new to the class or maybe new to D&D, play rogues, there's this tendency to be like, oh, I will steal from the party or I will be antisocial and so on. But what I really found interesting is when you were talking about, you know, being able to scout for traps and being able to protect the party from the second line, because there is a lot more, there are so many different ways to play the class. I mean, a lot of people would say a rogue is, I hide, I sneak attack, rinse, lather, repeat. But there is a lot more to it than that, right?
Absolutely. I think, and I think there's also sort of like the grander sort of overall thing. Like, again, going back to when I was playing Escape from Carceri, where I was like, cool, my character as a backstory has been betrayed by the rich and people buying, you know, sort of like buying their freedom. And then the world's richest man is like, hey, I want you to go break someone out. And I just was like, and that's the thing. And then actually of having that, Niall did it beautifully, of like my character going, I have betrayed the one rule I've made. And then the counter just going, I understand. And like going, cool, we're both struggling with this. But as you said, that idea of just going, if you were a little monster who was just stealing everything, you're like, we're not going to have you around.
Yeah.
You know, we're going to throw you in a hole. You live down there now. And to be oubliette with you. But
the party moves forward and we're just going to cut back to your character. Still in the hole. Cool. Digging yourself out gradually with your fingers.
You've now become, you want to be the big bad, but you're still not. They're like, oh, it's just you. You're still level 5. Crossbow. Boom.
The big sad.
Oh, that's nice.
That was a fantastic campaign. I really enjoyed watching it. If anyone hasn't seen it, it is available on VOD, so do go back and check it out or walk around listening to it as a podcast. You will find it very much worth the time. It was a good time. So from roguing to rolling.
Ooh, nice.
Yeah, I'm getting better at these days. Never actually owned one, but hey, it is time, in fact, to roll that dice. So get your emojis firing on all cylinders.
My microphone, I'm so excited about emojis.
Ooh, it was itching to be a natural 20, but it was in fact a natural 14.
Ooh.
But I'm quite glad it was, because I get to ask you this, Tom. What's the funniest moment you've experienced in game?
Oh, yeah, again, sort of like, there's been a few which have been, you know, and again, like having a great DM. So I was doing a one shot, and it just the entire campaign was mad. Like we had a moment where one of the characters was supposed to be like, oh, you know, I'm this very rich man, you know, had no money, and it was like, how do I show off? And it's sort of like at breakfast, he was like, you know, sort of bring me all the meats. And they were like, what? And so they brought him all the meat. And we were like, oh, there's nothing can we have a trolley? So we were going on this like a mission, pushing a trolley, and then we'd turn up and like, hello, would you like some meat? And that actually was helpful. We were like, but there was like another lovely moment where, first of all, my name was Bree Toscobble, who was a halfling. Okay. And we were like, oh, we need like sort of like pseudonyms. We're all called Toscobble now. Like a bunch of lawyers. They were like, hello, we're Toscobble, and Toscobble. Have you heard about the missing militia? But also like a lovely, really sort of like, and this was the DM really sort of hooked into this. So one of the other characters had sort of like hermit background, had come down from the mountains and was like, I'm not really sure how to do, you know, I want to go into a shop and I want to buy stuff, but I'm not quite sure. And I was like, oh, and you know, let me help you. And so we started off a little role play session where I sort of sat there and went, hello, welcome to the shop. Would you like to buy anything? And he was, oh, yeah. And I was like, I have many swords. Would you like to buy swords? And then we went to the blacksmith, who opened the door and went, "Hello, welcome to my shop. I have many swords. Would you like to buy anything?" Just that moment of just... And the DM was like, "Yeah, you just know how people talk in a shop." I was like, I was joking. I was like, "No, you won't." That's the way the character... Just the idea of someone walking in and just going, "Hello, welcome. Would you like some swords?" And we're like, yes, I would.
I always thought what D&D needed was more corporate roleplay, if I'm honest.
And I think, again, that same idea of just going, you're not quite sure how to do this. Just, again, like, okay, guys, we're going into the Dragon's Hoard. I will play the dragon.
Just a lot of swords.
I was like, "Hello," the dragon's like, "Hello, I have much treasure. Would you like some treasure? You can't have it. It is my treasure." And you're like, right. Okay, Eivor, what do you say to that? "I'll hit you with my axe." An option. No bad choices. Just maybe we could try to... I think that's, again, the nice... I like it. I like it when you can sort of talk your way out of a situation. I think I prefer that same idea. Just and that idea of just going, "Hey, I don't want to hit you. You know about this?" And like,
yeah.
"Oh, actually, no. I'm also worried about my sister." You're like, "Right, sister. We can work with that."
We have an alternative strategy.
Yeah.
I mean that ties in really well with and I must admit I'm not entirely familiar with them because I haven't played a game where they've been fully implemented. But in Tasha's brought in, I believe, the opportunity to parlay with monsters and bribe them with certain things, and that seems to be more opportunity for negotiation. So there are ways around tense situations that don't involve literal axing.
Like I said, with this one shot, so it was like monsters were attacking the militia and they were disappearing. And as we were still going out, they were like, "All right, we're going to the woods." And I noticed like one of the halfling guys is sort of there looking really sort of nervous. And I sort of go over and go, "What's up?" And he's like, "There's a monster, but the monster took care of me and I don't want to hurt it." And so I was like, "Right, I know this is a lot. You don't want to hurt the monster. Help us. We want to..." And just that idea of just going, like, I think it was like a sphinx in the end turned up, and then we were just like, "We're on your side, we're on your side." It was like, all right.
Who are the real monsters?
It's the people who are tearing down the trees. It's an who would have thought this has turned into anti-capitalism? But just as you said, that idea of just going, I think like the fact that sort of things are curving towards, let's say, more diplomatic and just going, "Hey, evil, strange concepts." I realize that's a huge topic for that idea of just going, I think I like someone describing it as going like, "How altruistic are you?" Because that's the sort, because I think that, again, that's the difficulty where you're like, "I'm chaotic good," and you're like, "Okay, what does that actually mean?" But and especially when you're getting into things like with, say, clerics or paladins, where you're no, your god is really angry at you. But it was funny. It was like, that person is hurt now. You broke their pots.
Consequences.
Yeah, it's real world. I hope you don't need your cures, because I'm taking those. Those are mine now.
So from a roving band of a family of philanthropist butchers, presumably with the catchphrase "Nice to meet you," shall we rove onto our next question?
Oh, by all means.
As the dice makes its way across the screen. Ooh, it is. In fact, it rhymes. 'Tis a 19. Interesting. I'm curious about this one. It means I'll ask you this, Tom. If you could go back and change an in-game decision, what would it be? Presumably ducking at a trap.
Yes, actually, weirdly. So I said, like, sort of one of the big campaigns I did with my friends was a Curse of Strahd. I'll just be careful because don't want to give too many spoilers for the campaign. But so near the beginning, there's like a haunted house where, which is nice when you first get to Barovia. They're like, "Hey, this is a weird house." So we go down into the basement, and it's like, "Okay, you're in this room." And the DM was like, "Oh, sort of, make an investigation check." Mm-hmm. And I made a relatively okay investigation check. This was like the first character. I was playing a paladin so I was like, first session, brilliant. And then he's like, "The door's pretty perfect." And again, you're sort of like, and I was like, interesting. And then one of the other characters was like, "Okay, I opened the perfect door." At which point, the mimic starts dragging in. And that's the thing. That guy sort of wiggled his way out, but it snaps the neck of my paladin.
Oh.
And so that was the thing. I was like, this first session, first time I'd played, met these people. And I'm sort of sitting there just going, what did I... Which did result in that, sort of like they defeat the monster and then we're like, we're in that session. Yeah. They then decided to call themselves the Doorbusters as a memorial. But then the nice thing is, like, they walk into the pub, and then my second character, Ava, this half-elf rogue, comes and is like, right, I'm looking for this man. Describes my other character, and it was like, they're like, why are you looking for him? And he's like, I need to kill him. And they're like, he's already dead. And I'm like, shit. But that again. That kind of like in retrospect, like if I sort of the decision, the sort of looking at the door, re-rolling that sort of stuff would have completely changed that campaign and might not have got me so into rogues as I am. Just that. I mean, there's so many. Again, that's sort of like it's an interesting question because you're like, okay, it's the butterfly effect thing. You make one small decision and everything's changed. Sort of like. And there's sort of like big decisions I've made, which I thought were going to have like real effects. And then I was like, oh, I got away with that. Like, again, later in Curse of Strahd, there was a, evil character who I was supposed to be guarding. And then when she was like, I'm going to kill you. I'm going to kill your family. And I just shove her down the stairs. And so she falls down the stairs, breaks her neck. And then all the players are like, and I went, technically, because she's evil, I've done a good thing here, but I've done it in a horrific way. Yeah, that's sort of like that's sort of that weird thing about like the the alignment chart. It's like, well, you've removed evil from the world, and then when they turn up, and then they're like, what happened? I went, she fell down the stairs, and they're like, make deception. I was like, it's not a lie. She did. True. She fell down the stairs, and they're like, you passed, and they're like, fine. And I'm just like, wow, okay.
No follow-up questions. Excellent.
Yeah. Let's go deal with some vampires.
Paladins make good lawyers, apparently. Speaking as a former legal professional, I think you would have had a very strong vicarious liability case for the initial mimic snapping.
Yeah. But again, that thing like with DM where you just like, if soon as you're like, this is perfect.
Yeah.
But again, I think that's the interesting thing about like this sort of non-visual thing where you're like, cool, if I actually was in the room and saw an absolutely clean door, I might have other thoughts, but when you're just like, it's just a really good door. It's just solid.
In this filthy house of ghosts and dust and death.
maybe someone just likes cleaning the door. I don't know.
Who's to say?
I'm not
Everybody's got their kinks, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Cleaning doors. Well, shall we dive through the door of questions and see?
Just keep them going, friend.
We'll see if we can keep it up the entire time. So it's another low one. It's 2. But the question with the 2 is, what spell or ability would you like to have in real life? Or if you could have it, do you have it?
Well, that's the thing. Like, sort of like, if I'm thinking, it's that level of going, okay, if I'm just me, I would like something like thaumaturgy or prestidigitation. Mending would actually be amazing. That it'd be enough where I could like the problem is that if you're too amazing, you get too much attention. But if you could be the person who, like, someone's like, oh, I broke my glasses, and I'm like, oh, just give me a moment, and kind of turn my back, and then go, there you go. As I said, like something like prestidigitation, where you're just like, oh, damn, I stepped in a puddle. There's all the mud gone. But also, so like you're kind of like going, oh, you're kind of like something like spider climb to just burst out of nowhere. Or like, sort of, the problem is I think I'd blow it like in a drunken bet where like, I could get up to that window. Or message would be great fun, but just to like be sitting, and especially like sort of working somewhere like theatre, where you're just sort of like going, you haven't got your sword. Feel free to respond.
Why is the props table unattended? The props table should never be unattended.
Fairy lights around it going. But yeah, something like that. I think that's the problem. Like you sort of like, as soon as you start going, I'd like Wish. I'm like, I bet you would.
That has been an answer that's been given, and I can't begrudge people for that. It's it's a clear choice. I am actually thinking I might reword the question to be cantrip, simply because it forces one towards the lower end of the scale, but still very useful.
Yeah.
Like I'm with you on mending or prestidigitation, because anything around like my flat that needed fixing or cleaning, yes, just chores done.
Again, you sort of like just get your clothes and you just go, boop. Or you just summon a nice smell. Yeah.
Well, minor illusion, no need for SFX on that.
Absolutely not. But again, like your trick is like, how long can you get away with that? Yeah, until someone's like, wait, are you magic? And you're like, maybe I am. Message, they're onto me.
I wish I'd taken Long Strider.
What spider climb? I've got the building. Like a spider monkey just sort of jumping across it. No, I think it's, or you end up like with like Shillelagh and you're like, I'm just going to hit things.
He'll be the world's greatest baseball player.
Yeah. It's just like...
that is always glowing.
Oh, that's the heart of the game. Yeah. I'm like a personification of the game of... That's right.
I would love it, though, if like everybody in the world, when you get to 18, you get to choose your one cantrip. And that's
that would be I think, again, sort of like that's an interesting question again, like, but when you're like 18 and you're like I think it's the Skullduggery Pleasant series where you all get like your one talent, and then there's an amazing bit where they're like their hotel's being attacked and they're like, right, what can you do? And this one guy's like, I can comprehend languages. And they're like, what? And he's like, I've heard it, which again, that would actually be a fun spell if you're trying to do something just generic. Would actually be great, just be able to walk into a room, or you could just be like at a place and go, I know what you're saying, I can talk to you. Which would be, I think, again, like we're going back into the idea of like a more diplomatic version of the game where you're like, cool, I can now just talk to you and just go, I don't like you. And I was like, didn't need that spell. Whoops.
Super useful if you were like in the like an archaeologist or in the British Museum or something, and then and you wanted to understand what the hieroglyphics were saying and that sort of thing. That would be really cool.
But then again, that's the problem when people are like, how do you know that? And you're like, oh,
many years of studying.
Yeah, reasons. Like, again, sort of like a campaign I'm playing at the moment where I'm like, I can understand this character, and then someone's like, oh, speak with animals, and I'm like, I can understand because I've spent a lot of time, but they're not speaking English to me, but I can kind of get general feelings of just going, you're sad. I can work through why you're sad, but then someone else is like, no, I'm sad because my feet hurt, and they're like, my feet hurt. I'm like, well, I could work that out. I didn't need. But I said, like the British Museum thing, where someone's like, "Oh no, this is fake. This isn't a language." I'm like, how do you know that? I am a time traveler.
I'm very keen on
or even like the weird thing where someone's like, "You started speaking ancient Sumerian." Yeah, I'm like, oh, that's weird.
It's this thing that happens sometimes, it's allergies.
Oh, is that the time? Sometimes I just start speaking languages.
So from speaking languages to speaking about our next question, it is time to roll that dice. And we are sticking around the low numbers, but I'm liking it because they're good questions. So that's a 6, and a 6 means I ask you this, Tom. How did you start playing TTRPGs?
Oh, again, sort of like having a little think about this. So I remember I must be about 10, and there was I couldn't tell you which edition it is, but this is like before 2000, like one of those packs. So maybe it's first edition, but the sort of setup.
Maybe AD&D?
It might. I think it might. Yeah, probably AD&D. So I had that, but then sort of, I wasn't having people to play with. So I was sort of looking for, because I was, ever since I was little, I was really into history and mythology. That was like the big thing I loved.
For sure.
And so And also sort of like, so that and like the old computer we had back then, we had Baldur's Gate and, sort of, which was sort of, that was sort of the weird thing, right? Because I played it again on Steam, and then that just sort of thing of just go, oh, well, this is all very, it's very different. It's actually quite sweet that a friend of mine started playing Baldur's Gate 3, and then I was like, is this what this is like now? I'm like, yeah. And he's like, I'm turning into a badger. I was like, yeah, it's great, being a druid. And sort of, so like that, I had a collection of, I think it's 3.5 books. That was sort of like the thing I would spend my money on. Again, never ran a campaign, but was just that sort of, it's like when you're just a child and you're just like, I just like looking at the pictures, sort of like maybe in hindsight now I could sort of get them out and just go, oh wow, okay, there might be completely new stuff for me to think about. And like, I think like I tried to play it at school, but the problem was that we didn't have anyone who actually knew how to play. And then it was like, and then sort of 5-6 years ago, I said a friend of mine was like, oh, I know a guy who's wanting to DM. And that became the Curse of Strahd campaign we did. Oh, yeah. And sort of since then, sort of, again, it's just that thing of then when, it's become this hobby that a surprising number of people are doing. Yeah. And it's actually sort of like that weird introduction thing where you're like, cool, what character are you playing? And you're like, right, okay, we are set for like an hour. Because again, I know people are like, oh, you don't want to hear. You're like, no, it's great. When you have something that someone's so passionate about. Yeah. And then go... And the nice thing is that these things are all so succinct, really, where you're like, oh, let me tell you about this really nice moment I had. And you're like, that's amazing. That reminds me of when I did this. And that, and you're like, that's your evening. That's, and again, sort of like from doing this, sort of I've done other things. Like I've DM'd a Lady Blackbird campaign, which is really, really fun if you're looking, but just that same idea of just going, cool, it's just a goblin flying an airship. And I think, again, that's sort of now sort of like realizing there's like so many people are playing these sort of games and you're like, oh, everything's sort of opening up, and this sort of, and this has been the fun of like doing Roll Together. You're like, people we have never actually been in the same city with. And you're like,
that's true, yeah.
Yeah, just it's and you're like, cool. I think I've got like a very childish understanding. I'm like, cool, we're friends now. Yeah. Yeah, we're all going to go for a picnic, and that's going to be lovely.
Well, that was the theme of our experience, right?
Absolutely. And I think, like going back, just that, like we said, the idea of just going, oh, we're not going. This is just a group of animals who are really good friends, and don't understand why you would, like, no, stop being mean, and just, oh, bless you, when you got to T-Bot, and you're like, I'm just fighting, hungry. Like, cool, this is probably one of the worst. Like, we have seen horrors. And that's the thing I like to think for like our background. I think we fought really intense things, but it hasn't occurred to us. We're like, oh, do you remember when that lich came to town? You're like, oh, the big bony man. Yeah, that was me. Yes.
Yeah, I remember we had jam sandwiches that day.
Yeah, just the idea of just going, it's focused on picnics. That's the level we're at.
Picnic law. So this is going to be a bit of a strained one. I apologize. From picnics to picking questions via some dice deciding. Shall we roll that dice once more?
Once again.
Ooh. Okay, that's a 9. A 9 means I ask you this, Tom. What would you say to a new player, someone who's considering getting into TTRPGs or D&D?
Yeah, I sort of like kind of been dancing around this bit.
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah, I would say, again, it's great fun. You need to be brave. I know that's a big step, sort of going, on the whole, people are nice and will want to help you, sort of, there will be people who don't. Try not to be with them. And if you do get someone like that, realize there are hundreds of other people who won't be like that.
Yeah, for sure.
It is intimidating, especially like I said, like the idea where you're like, I think possibly find someone who's played before, who's played a bit, and so you can go to them and say, what would you like to do? And that kind of idea of going, okay, do you want to hit things? Do you want to, and then because you might go, oh, I'd like to have like an animal friend. You're like, okay, maybe you could be a druid. Maybe you could be a ranger. That sort of that level. I mean, the last year has sort of shown that you can do this online, sort of, it does miss out on an aspect. But again, for timing, it's kind of has a result when people are like, no, I can't come and do a session,
That is, it's pros and cons, right?
Yeah. And I think, yes, I keep going back to the idea of being brave. I think, so like people I'm talking to who are like, oh no, I couldn't, a group of strangers. And I go, yeah, that is intimidating. I think, yes, that sort of idea of just going, if you kind of know what you want to play, hopefully you can find some people. Also sort of like keep asking, sort of people might sort of, if you keep, people will be like, I'm running a long campaign, I can't obviously bring in, but then that sort of thing of going, oh, if someone's doing a one shot, there's also the possibility, I was like, well, you could run your own session, but I wouldn't necessarily recommend that if you haven't really. Also, I think the big thing is, remember, with things like Critical Role, they've got editing, they've got that, sort of like podcasts who like, and they will these podcasts will tell you, they edit out the ums and the ahs and also sort of like, again, if you've got a nice group of people who will just let you go, I need to do some math now. Hold on. Again, sort of like the Curse of Strahd, which again was like one of the other funniest moments that our ranger cast Detect Good and Evil at the top of a mountain. And the DM was like, I'm going to need like 15 minutes, and then came back and was like, okay, this is the list of all the monsters that were in this circle, just again, just and have fun, sort of like going sort of, and the same, so be considerate. I just think it all keeps coming back to like be a good egg, really, sort of going,
decent human being. There's a lot of them out there. I like to think there's a lot more decent people than there are otherwise.
You would be surprised, sort of like, and I think, as I said, like keep asking, don't. I'm like explaining human interactions here, but so like I understand you can get very excited and like, oh, I'll do this, and just like go, just say, and then someone might be able to say, oh, I can do a one shot, I can do this. It's also a really good way of meeting people, so like I think that's the weird thing when people are like, oh, when you get into your 20s and your 30s, you don't make new friends. And I'm like, I turn up and I'm like, hello, I'm an otter. We're now very good friends. Adventure.
We have broken bread and rolled dice. We are now bonded.
For life.
And there are ways as well, like, if people are nervous about being around people or pathologically shy like I used to be, you can play like a text version. Like there are forums and so on where you can just make like a move a day. I am playing in a game like that at the moment. I had to pretty much teach myself how to code. So you would probably need to know more about the rules and things in order to do that. But there's so many ways to get into the game is sort of my point. But I am, much like yourself, looking forward to being able to just be in a room with people again and having that sort of a little bit of banter before the game and in the midway session, like having a slice of pizza or a glass of wine or whatever it might be. And, but like you say, you are more likely to get people that don't miss sessions when it's all online.
Absolutely.
And you're absolutely right as well. Like a lot of people, I think, having experienced Critical Role, do you think that's what D&D is supposed to be? And it's like not every party is going to be a group of professional voice actors with an editing team and production team. And I like Critical Role for what it is. But the actual gaming experience itself is very different, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Well, from new players to a new question. Yeah, I've committed to this. So I'm going to see it through to the blooming end. I tell you. All right, interesting. So that is a 15.
Ooh.
And that means I'll ask you this, Tom. Where, how, where, and why? Where do you start when making a character?
Oh, really nice. So I think that I think the big thing is find out what the campaign is. Obviously, find out what the tone is.
Yeah, for sure.
Although there's the slightly tricksterous thing of just going, I'm going to make because that's the weird turn. You're like, if you make a really insane character, you will probably have like the most in-depth role-playing, intense thing. But then if you make like, I'm a really, hard paladin, you're going to fall in a hole and someone's going to steal your shoes and you need to, I think that's the sort of the pressure thing where you're just like, silly campaign becomes very dark in every way. For me, I said, so like, if you start to imagine like, okay, we know that, like, let's take Carceri, where I was like, okay, what would be interesting was sort of like, we know it's a prison break, sort of thing. And I was like, okay, I'd like to play sort of a lawful character. Yeah. I like playing as half elves. That's just sort of again a preference. And then again, I was like, okay, rogue. And then they were like, oh, there's this inquisitive thing. I was like, I think a lot of like, yes, the sort of the things I've been playing and like the fact of just going, oh, I'd quite like, this seems new. This seems, especially for like a role play kind of thing where you're like, okay, what would it be like to play this kind of character? And like with Ilex, where it just became, he's paranoid, but he's rightfully paranoid because people have been trying to kill him for years. He's been going to dinner parties and everyone's collapsed and he's like, I can't eat soup. I can't. Although sort of like, again, I think it's the same sort of thing about going, it's quite different for, say, this, where you're like, cool, I need to perform on stream. I'm going to need a character that I can kind of keep up. I'm going to also need sort of a character type that I can stay in. And also a name that isn't too sort of difficult to sort of say or kind of... Yeah. Also, sort of puns. Puns are fun. So, like, if you can sneak them by, sort of like... it didn't actually really come up on the Carceri thing, but his name was Ilex Viridian. So he just called himself Holly Green because that was just a lessening of that kind of, and also the fact that I think I said where I was like, is he tall? Because like the finding the name within the name, you're like, a very different campaign. Yes, cool. You've solved my anagram riddle, but even like sort of like for us, Wilby. I got there's that poster of like sort of militia standing and it says, "Le Otters will be prosecuted." And then there was like, "Le Otters are innocent." So I'm like, I just like the idea that Wilby, for some way, is like, Otters. I'm an otter. Wilby, that's a good name. Just, again, that kind of... Yeah, I think it also very much depends on the campaign where you're like, okay, you put things in that are just going to amuse yourself.
Very much so. Yeah. I mean, in that one shot, I mean, Brock is literally just the old English word for badger. That was very simple.
Again, that's exactly what I'm talking about. Where you're like, hey, this is amusing, and if people get that, that's great.
It's just a different level.
Yeah,
it doesn't mean you don't play the character seriously. It's just one of those things that happens to be, and it's just a little Easter egg, I guess.
But also, sort of like we can going. Brock might have been called that by someone and gone, right, that's what that, sort of like there's all sorts of stuff you can come in, but you're like, no, that makes sense in world. the otter has read a sign about not looting. So I think that's the sort of, and again, I mean, a large part of it is look at the campaign. Also, sort of, if you can communicate with other people, I mean, it's fun to have an Oops All Clerics campaign, but just to have that moment of just going, are we having any heals? Because I don't want to tell you. But then that same sort of idea of going, say that, again, if you're thinking of like a sort of improv kind of thing, where you're like, interesting, we need you to balance this out. You're like, oh, that's sort of like doing campaigns where they're like, we need a fighter. You're like, oh, there's a lot you can do with a fighter. I could be a barbarian as well, sort of like, you give me that sort of that rule restriction. Let's play within the space.
Yeah, because even within that, like you said, there's a lot of choice to develop a character and to finesse the role. It's not just I am champion fighter. Every turn I roll a d20 and occasionally I hit with things. Yeah, there's so much more room within that. You just reminded me of like my most on the nose character name. Where my one excuse for this is that it was a secret identity name when I was asked to guest for one session in a friend's home game, and my character was called Roland de 20. Yeah.
Again, that sort of thing of just going, what a strange thing in the world. Like, bizarre, but
well, it's like there's a town in the Netherlands called 20, and it's like, well, could have been sort of that pan-European thing. Could happen in Faerun, who knows?
Absolutely. Well, yeah. But again, that's always quite, like we said, like when you've been given these restrictions, and when you like, as a DM, you're like, explain to me, go on. I'm giving you this chance. You want to call yourself Dildo Baggins? Go on.
Spelling is your friend a lot of the time to kind of get away with these things because it's phonetics is not always obvious, but it's I like that. I like that approach to naming.
Another thing I could recommend that's just finished is John Finnemore's Souvenir program, and so like the last season, it's like 6 episodes, but it's like a family history going backwards, and then you're fighting. So like you meet a character at a funeral before you meet. And there is a point where someone was like, oh, you're getting married to Colonel Noon.
Yeah.
And they're like, how do you spell that? And then they work out it's N-O-hyphen-O-N-E. And then they're like, you rot. If you tell anyone. But that same, which is actually quite, again, that idea of like, if you can get away with that and you're just sort of like doing, no. But of course, that's weird as a DM. You're like, you never saw it written down. A bold decision where you're like, it means no one. You're like,
yeah,
just thought it actually means Noon. It's a cool name.
There's an esoteric Easter egg for mythology. The Odyssey. No one has killed me.
Again, as soon as you start getting into it, you're like, all right.
Yeah.
Again, people at a game table, Odysseus, who's just like, hey, I'm just going to lie about my roles. They're like, oh, you tricksy. Oh.
So, from one epic journey to our own epic journey through the questions, and we are rapidly approaching the end of our time together, but I think we've got time to squeeze in one more because I am enjoying this, as I hope you are. What's the dice? Make its journey one more time. It is a 10. So we end on this question, Tom. What do you like in a DM?
Again, this has been the wonderful thing about this journey where I've kind of subtly... I've had some very good DMs. I've had some less sort of. I think again, we're coming back to the idea of sort of. I'm going to say sort of kindness, but that sort of like thing of going, but also sort of like a control. Let's say a controlled chaos rather than a chaotic sort of order. But that idea of going, okay, I'd like to do like if you're making your character, like I'd like to do this, and then having a DM who's like, yes, great. Can I do that? Can this character have this? No, but if you're happy to do, sort of like I've done campaigns where I like this, and they're like, that's too powerful. You can think you can do that, and maybe you'll get there one day. But and again, like I said about my moment with like the shop, where I was genuinely excited, where I was like, oh, my character has inadvertently tapped into like the way that shopkeepers in this town talk. That kind of. And again, sort of like, I think sort of a willingness to bend as well always helps, that things you can't. I think, again, like I said, the more sort of strict you try and be, the more that, just by nature, a player will try and sort of batter against it. And having a DM who's like, cute, that's going to have problem, sort of.
Yeah.
But like sort of seeing stuff where you're like, I think it's that same sort of question about like what would a natural 20 mean? You're like, where someone was like, oh, are you saying you've got to acknowledge every natural 20? Oh, I want to lift this mountain. I rolled a 20, and you're like, no, it doesn't mean you succeed. It means something's going to happen, and it's going to be like if you're trying to lift the mountain, like you feel it's moving. You're like, oh. You're like, no, but you're not going to lift a mountain.
Yeah.
And again, it's sort of like there's the levels of kind of sort of like, let's say, honesty, where you're like, yeah, you can trick me. Yeah, of course, I want, mess around with me. But then if I'm just like, no, hold on, wait.
Yeah.
I asked about this, and then you told me, like insight or kind of that sort of thing of just going. And also, I think same, like I said about the thing on the top of the mountain in Barovia, being able to just go, I just need a moment, which is like for a home game is much easier rather than like something we're doing here where we're like, oh, we have a time restriction, we need to get, also you can't just, as you said, you just go, pizza break.
No one will be seated during the mathematics portion of the stream.
Although that great fun of just go, okay, falling damage.
Yeah.
Look at all my dice, I think again, we're just back to the idea of just being a good egg, kind of. I think for player and DM, remember it's not you against the dungeon master. That's not so much fun. You're all playing together, and sort of kind of just make sure people have fun, sort of. And I think like actually being the great thing about like the way Roll Together's worked that we've done. Our DMs have been very good at going, right, does anyone have anything they don't want to discuss? Absolutely. Anything that, sort of...
safety and player well-being, like that's almost like the top priority, the first thing that's addressed, and then it's like, what do people want in order for this to be a fun and enjoyable experience? And that's a really good thing, I think.
And that's sort of like that weird thing about going, how do you feel about these various atrocities? Yeah. And you're like, I'm not happy about them. But if someone says, I don't want any stinking orcs in here, sort of like, I think, again, that's sort of like working within the boundaries and being able to go, but this would be upsetting or this or sort of...
Context is important, and whether it's an opportunity for you to do the right thing or like there is a bit of a nuance, but that is a discussion that definitely needs to happen, and I think should happen in every game really, so
absolutely
that everybody knows what they're playing and how. Same
like the thing where everyone's like, Game of Thrones is like that because that's the way the world was. You're like, it wasn't. No. It did have baths back in the medieval period. People, it's just that sort of thing of just going, So on the note of stinky medieval peasants,
we shall move from the Game of Thrones, but the game of this conversation is sadly over. That is about all we have time for. It has been an absolute pleasure, Tom. Is there anything that you want to plug?
Again, sort of, if you go to my Twitter, at Thomas Jancis, Jancis, I'll keep you all updated. As you're probably aware, the world's in a very weird position now. I might have shows happening. Again, sort of to date this, we found out on Monday whether restrictions get changed. I should possibly be doing something at the end of the month, but again, like the guy I'm working with is like, I'll talk to you on Monday. We'll see what we can do. So if you follow my Twitter, I'll keep you all updated with my escapades.
All things being well, there will be shows to see, find out about, and enjoy. And speaking of shows to see, find out about, and enjoy, thank you for joining us and being part of this show. If you did enjoy it, we stream every Saturday from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. GMT, and we also stream D&D games on Mondays and Tuesdays. On Mondays from 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. GMT, we are still playing Flustered in the Feywild. Catch up if you haven't already, enjoy it if you have. And on Tuesdays, we are still streaming Warriors of Waterdeep, the Anvil of Name I Cannot Pronounce. All of our shows stream at twitch.tv/RollTogetherRPG, and there's a YouTube link in chat for view on demand. And don't forget, you can also enjoy as a podcast, doing your gardening, wandering about, whatever it is you like to do when you're listening to your podcasts. Many thanks again to our D20 Club on Patreon, without whom none of our shows would be possible. A thank you to Tom, all of our sponsors and supporters, and remember, stay classy at the table. See you next time. Be good eggs.